Hey, folks. Bartlett, New Hampshire, Derry, New Hampshire, Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, Santa Monica. What was I reading about Santa Monica lately? Something interesting. Boulder, Colorado, Crystal Lake, Illinois. Um, was that Little Rock? I have such a soft spot in my heart for Little Rock, Arkansas. I made a wish in Little Rock, Arkansas. I threw a quarter into that famous fountain you have, and the wish came true. Kansas, terrible, awful, no good day. Absolutely. What we're doing here right now is waiting for Facebook to come on because they come on a little bit after you all do. Wichita, Kansas, Cape Cod, Mass. I hope it's beautiful there. We lost our power for the middle of the day because we had so many storms going through here. Nashville, dream someday to get to the Grand Ole Opry. And Facebook, somebody said Facebook is on. I'm not seeing it yet. Do I trust you or do I wait to see the little F come up? Come on, my Facebook peeps, come on up. Show me where you are. Hey, Janet, how are you? Canada. Must be beautiful up there right now. Knoxville, lots of, oh, there we go. Facebook is on. Hi, folks. Terrific. So yeah, let me start and where you expect me to today. I didn't ask for questions today because I was pretty sure where people would want me to go. Today, the House of Representatives passed the budget reconciliation bill. This was written in the cards really in November when the Republicans picked up the House, the Senate, and the presidency, that they were going to push through something this heinous, really. So I know, it felt like a roller coaster when it seemed like the Senate might stand against it, or it seemed like the House might stand against it. They did have a majority and they passed a ton of stuff through under what is called budget reconciliation. So they could do so with a simple majority. The Democrats in the Senate couldn't stand against it. And, just to be clear here, the Democrats really did do the best they could to slow it down, to drag it out. One of the reasons that Hakeem Jeffries talked today for 8 hours and 45 minutes, the longest speech in the House, was because he was trying to make sure that the vote wasn't taken in the middle of the night the way that the Republicans wanted for it to be. I believe they convened at around 3 o'clock in the morning to do this vote. So we as disappointing as it is, the Democrats put up a good fight against it, and it is what it is. We knew it was going to pass, and it did pass. So let me outline what that means in a bunch of different ways. The first thing to note is that it is a very long bill. It's about 900 and something pages. And there's a lot of material in that a lot of people hate. That's important because, one of the things we learned yesterday when Donald Trump had a number of the House Republican holdouts come to the White House to talk to him about the bill is that he did not appear to know that the bill cuts Medicaid. Because the Republicans have been screaming that it doesn't cut Medicaid. They have been trying to say that they're only attacking waste, fraud, and abuse. But we know there is virtually no waste, fraud, and abuse among the users of Medicaid. The place where fraud comes into play is among the people who are scamming the system, who own the other side of it, people like Rick Scott in the Senate, who has paid, I think, what is still the largest penalty for scamming, not Medicaid. I think it was Medicare. But the point is, it's not the individuals who are scamming Medicaid. It's the corporations that are doing it. So even Trump recognized that that this would be enormously unpopular. And there are a number of things in the bill that there's a lot to hate, like I say. And the reason that that's important right now is because the Republican Party is divided over this bill. They pushed it through. They did what Trump wanted them to do for a number of reasons, I think. There are some people who are true believers, and I'll talk more about them in a minute. There are some people who are afraid either of their constituents or of Trump. I think probably, and maybe this is because I'm just a Pollyanna, but I think there are probably a lot of people who were just hoping that somebody else would take care of the problem. And I think you saw that with people like Lisa Murkowski, who gave a yes vote in the Senate for all the wrong reasons and seemed to hope that the House would bail her out. And of course they didn't, because everybody was hoping that somebody else would bail them out. So it's important to remember that in this really, well, they're calling it while the Republicans have a name for it that has since been changed. The official name of the bill was originally the One Big Beautiful Bill, which they literally named it that. Chuck Schumer insisted they change that name in the Senate, and they did. I don't know what it's called now, but it is also being called by the people who hate it the MAGA murder bill. And that's not inaccurate, because a lot of people are going to die because of this bill. But it's important to remember that the Republicans themselves are divided about it because it is so incredibly unpopular. And they would not have voted on it in the middle of the night, taken it up in the middle of the night, tried to hide what was in it, lied about what's in it, had they thought there was anything good in the bill. And that's going to be important to remember, because this is now the signature piece of legislation of the Republicans in the 21st century. And that's, I don't think it's going to play terribly well. So let me tell you what is in the bill, a little bit of what's in the bill that is unpopular. First of all, you've heard, I assume, that it cuts taxes for the wealthy, significantly cuts taxes for the wealthy and for corporations. And the Republicans tried to get around that by saying, oh, they're only continuing the tax cuts that Trump put in and the Congress put in under Trump in 2017. We're currently living under that, so that doesn't change things. That's an entirely new and unprecedented way to score the cost of a bill. And the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says that this bill will add at least 3.3 trillion with a T dollars to the debt over the next 10 years. And the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian institute, estimates that that number could be 6 trillion to $10 trillion. This is essentially unsustainable. So the next time any Republican says they're trying to cut back on the national debt or on the national deficit, you can laugh in their face, because this is a debt and deficit buster like we have never seen before. Remember, a deficit is the annual difference between the amount of money that the federal government takes in revenue and the amount it pays out in appropriations or in debt servicing and so on. That's the deficit. The debt is the accumulation of that. And they are calculated differently because the debt has to be financed. So and it's just like borrowing to pay a credit card, and you have to pay interest on it. So the debt that is added is more than the deficit that is added, simply the same way that carrying a debt is. And what we are doing then under this bill is we are increasing the debt ceiling, allowing the country to borrow a lot more money in order to cut taxes for the extremely wealthy and for corporations. So we're borrowing money as a nation in order to give it to the very wealthy. The other thing that is in this bill is almost law now. It's been passed by both houses. It is now going to be signed. I'll tell you more about that in a second, by President Trump. But the other thing, of course, are dramatic cuts to the social safety net in the United States, which was already really weak compared to most trade-based democratic nations. So Medicaid will lose, I believe it's $890 billion with a B dollars over the next, it's either 5 or 10 years. I don't remember off the top of my head. Now, if you look at that measure, it is designed to go into effect after the midterms. So the tax cuts are immediate, but the cuts to the social service programs are designed to go into effect after the midterms. But in fact, because hospitals and nursing homes and so on need to do their budgets years in advance, the cuts will start earlier than that. They will have to start downsizing. And we've already, since the bill passed today, lost one clinic, which said we just know we can't stay open. I don't remember now where that was. So although those cuts won't go into play for about 18 months, in fact, they are we're going to start to see some of the cuts earlier than that. There are also dramatic cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the SNAP program, which helps especially children around the country. In some states, the rate of SNAP use can be as high as 20% of the children in that state. Usually it's more like 16%. That's a lot of children who are no longer going to have supplemental nutrition assistance. And it's not much money for each person that's on SNAP. And then the other thing that the bill does in the cuts is it cuts the energy tax credits so that we're helping the United States to switch to electric vehicles and solar power and wind power, and instead gives a boost to fossil fuels, the fossil fuels that are contributing to climate change. And that this will, people who are interested in climate activism or in addressing the the issues that we have are really very concerned about the fact the U.S. under President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris made a big leap forward in trying to bring the United States, along with other countries, to switching into renewable energy. We will now jump backward and will be contributing instead to the further use of fossil fuels in the United States. So that is also in the bill. The other thing that is in this law, soon to be law, is something that got a lot less attention than those other pieces, although plenty of people were still talking about it. And that's that for all the cuts that it makes to the social welfare system in the United States, and I only gave you a handful of them, it does in fact increase funding for deportation, detention facilities for migrants, and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, by $170.7 billion. What that money does is it makes ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, those agents who have their faces covered and are rounding up people off the streets, the highest funded federal law enforcement agency in the United States in history. It has more money at its disposal over the next 4 years than the budgets of the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, the U.S. Marshals, and the Bureau of Prisons combined. That money is designed to give about $51.6 billion to build a wall on the border. That's more than 3 times what Trump spent in his first term on the wall. It provides $45 billion for detention facilities for ICE. And that's an increase of about 265% in ICE's annual detention budget. And it provides about $30 billion for ICE enforcement. That's a threefold increase in ICE's annual budget, and will allow ICE to hire about 19,000 more agents. As you know, in the last week in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican, of course, has opened a detention facility for migrants in the Everglades for between 3,000 and 5,000 migrants there in the Everglades. And the facilities are tents with cages in them that are susceptible to rain and heat, of course, to flooding and heat. And Trump has said that they will build many more of those across the country, and that he is interested not only in deporting or imprisoning what he calls criminals, although about 8% of the undocumented migrants that ICE is picking up are actually have actually been convicted of a crime. The rest of them have not, and so it's a little hard to see this hellscape that Trump keeps describing. But Trump is also saying that he wants to get rid of what he calls the homegrowns, that is, people in the United States citizens who he claims are criminals. And it is worth remembering, of course, that he has defined people who worked in his last administration as people who could be traitors, could be charged with treason because they spoke out against him. So I think you really have to look at this measure that is about to be signed into law and recognize that what it does is it creates a police force that is answers only to the executive branch. And I won't say to Trump here, because I actually don't think he's calling the shots on immigration. I think that's Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, and to some degree, Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, that and the advisor that Trump has, who has no, by the way, political power. He's simply an advisor. That's Holman, that they call the border czar, but really all he is an advisor. I think they're the ones really calling the shots on this. But this is going to be a huge police force designed to round up Americans and put them in detention camps. And I just here quickly wanted to make sure you understand what a concentration camp is. It is literally a place where people are concentrated. I can tell you the history of them, which is actually quite interesting and has a lot to do with American history, but where people are concentrated without due process of law. They tend to be either members of persecuted minorities or political prisoners, and they are deliberately imprisoned in a very small area without adequate facilities to support them. So, and it's worth thinking of that in light of the fact as well that we have now, I was of 2 days ago, I think, I lose track of time, the paperwork from Kilmer, Abrego, Garcia, who was rendered, not deported, because he didn't, well, in his case, actually was from El Salvador, but he was rendered to prison in El Salvador against the wishes and against the orders of the US courts. And he was tortured there. He has written, you can find it online if you're interested. He wrote about the beatings and the sleep deprivation and, the things that he endured at Seacott prison. And in fact, he is currently at his own request being held in prison out of concern that the US government will render him back there if he is out of federal prison, which is just a crazy thing, that somebody is preferring to be in prison than face the US government. All of that is the background to this bill. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I think we got here ideologically, because, and I will tell you about the history behind where we are right now, but I think it's important to recognize that there is an ideology behind this this bill and behind the MAGA Republicans that is part of America. It's one that has ruled us in the past. It is one that until now, at least, and the jury is still out, we have always overcome. So it's worth thinking, I think, a bit about the ideology behind this bill and behind MAGA Republicans. And that is, if you think about the world, there's two ways, at least in the United States, to think about the relationship of people to their government. One is simply to say, well, some people are better than others. They're smarter, they're richer, they're the right color, they're the right religion, they're the right gender, you could come up with any reason you would like. They're married to the right people, they're descended from the right people, to say that some people are better than others. And if you admit the principle that some people are better than others, well, by definition, they should be able to rule. And that's the idea behind kings. And that's the idea behind oligarchies, a group of people organizing a government to rule everybody. That's the idea behind dictators. And that's the idea behind autocrats or authoritarians, that they're just better than the rest of people. And ultimately, if some people are better than others, it makes sense that one person is better than everybody else and has the right to rule. And that is, as I say, the ideology behind Hitler, the ideology behind somebody like Vladimir Putin, the ideology behind dictators, sometimes the ideology behind kings in the 19th century and before that. It is also the ideology behind human enslavement in the American South and in the parts of the United States where indigenous Americans were enslaved. In the American West, for example, the idea that, those people do not have the ability, the religion, the gender, the color, the whatever, to participate in their government, and they must be ruled. And that is, I think, what you're increasingly seeing. I mean, this has been the argument on the radical right now since at least the 1950s. But you're really seeing that play out here with this idea of imprisoning people right now, largely people of color, but it's going to expand. If history is any judge. But you're also seeing it with Trump saying things like he's going to let some farmers keep the migrants who have been working there undocumented for 20 years because those are the good ones. And that those, they'll look out for those people. And that is quite literally what enslavers and then unreconstructed Southerners said about Black Americans or Brown Americans in the American South and in the American West in the late 19th century. I mean, it's literally the exact same language. But we're in a really different place in this moment, in that in those eras, because the people who had been enslaved, discriminated against, kept down because of their gender or whatever, had really never had opportunities. It was possible to construct a worldview in which you could say, well, those people can never learn because it had been illegal to give them education. But we in front of us in the United States today have literally, since the 1970s and the after the programs of the Great Society go into place in the mid 1960s, seen a world in which racial, gender, religious, ability, I said gender, I think I've whatever, any religious, I didn't say that, minorities have been able to demonstrate their equality, which I think is one of the things giving such fangs to MAGA is that, I saw recently Charlie Kirk talking about how Ketanji Brown Jackson was a DEI or a civil rights hire. And if you've read anything by Ketanji Brown Jackson, she's brilliant. And, she's done all this amazing stuff. And Charlie Kirk dropped out of community college in his first, I think it was the first semester. And it's basically just a grifter, a shit poster. I'm sorry. Somebody who just says horrible stuff. And faced with the reality that people who are not white men are in fact equal and sometimes, quite frankly, more than equal. What you are seeing in this moment is the attempt to erase our history, to erase Harvey Milk's name off a ship, Harriet Tubman's name off a ship, to erase the women who worked worked in intelligence, to get rid of the history of the Black and brown and gay and female and whatever people who built this country. And I think that recognition, you can look at the enslavers and the unreconstructed Southerners and recognize that they are worried that maybe they're not going to always stay on top of things. But I think you look at this moment where they're not simply preventing people from getting rights. They're trying to erase all that, says they recognize that they have to erase us all in order to regain control of the country. And I think that is what we are seeing now. That recognition that people really are equal, and they've got to erase those, throw us out of jobs, throw us out of the country, get rid of us all in order to, they can't do it without doing that. They can't regain control of the country unless they shut everybody else up, because we really can do it. The other ideology speaks to reality, to the reality I just described. It says that everybody is created equal and that the government has a responsibility to protect that equality, to make sure everybody is treated equally before the law, that they have equal access to resources, and they have a right to a say in their government. And that's what really reflects reality. The idea that, it doesn't necessarily, your contribution to society does not necessarily correlate to your paycheck. That, maybe you're the person who, checks on the little old ladies in your town, even though you're not, a wolf on Wall Street. And that recognition that that's the way the world really works is the ideology that stands against that idea that some people are better than others. And the reality is the vast majority of people in the United States believe that. And what's more, we have proof that this country does best when the government acts on that. Quite literally, this is what the US government did after 1933 when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected and took office. And it's the world that we have lived in since the 1935 Social Security Act, which provided the basics of a social safety net for those people who were destroyed in our trade-based economy if they were injured or if they were widowed or if they were children who didn't have parents and so on. So if you look at how the United States functioned under that system from 1933 to 1981, it had a booming economy. It had the difference in poverty rates was declining. The opportunities were increasing. People were getting education and so on and so forth. And that's what the Reagan Revolution stopped. And we are now seeing with this measure the ultimate attempt to destroy that government and take us back to a world where a very few people will rule. But we have added in this moment this extraordinary deficit spending, which, you know, in the 1920s they never would have done when they were living like this. The Republicans simply would have balanced the budget. I mean, the crazy thing here is what you're seeing is not a return to the 20s even. What you're seeing is essentially open looting. And that is going to be really important. And I'll tell you more about that in just a second. So you should be angry about this bill. You should be incredibly sad about this bill, as I am. But again, I'm going to emphasize that all is not over. And here's why I say that. I looked up the numbers because one of the things that really gives me hope in this country is that it's a really big country. There are 334 million of us in this country. Actually, I think it's a little low. I think there's more than that. So people make comparisons of where we are right now to Nazi Germany. And Nazi Germany, I looked up the numbers, had 67 million people in 1933. That's a much smaller country. And we're a much bigger physical country as well. And we have a federal system in which we have a number of democratic states led by democratic governors who are pushing back against the measures that this bill and that the Trump administration are trying to put in place. So one of the people I'm watching very closely is J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, who is, running a pretty tight ship up there in terms of taking care of the people in Illinois and protecting them from ICE and creating essentially an image of what the government can be. But he's not the only one. There are a number of Democratic-dominated states, and it's going to be more difficult to create a juggernaut of the United States as a fascist system than it is a smaller country. Now, there are the other piece of this, of course, is that the Trump administration is just wrecking the economy. They are wrecking the economy. And a lot of people have said that this bill, with its unaddressed extraordinary deficits and then debt, is going to hurt that even more. And, you know, people like me are very concerned at the degree to which Trump is invested in cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency really pays off if the dollar is devalued, which it seems he's working to do. So that's another piece that's out there, but there is hope within this. And that is that all of these measures are deeply unpopular. They're not unpopular among a very small group of people. They're deeply unpopular, not only among poor people who are hurt by them, or people who care about social welfare and social justice who are hurt by them or hurt by the fact their neighbors are being hurt. But when you look at the destruction of the US economy, you're also hurting entrepreneurs, you're hurting capitalists, you're hurting people who really voted for Trump or supported Trump or didn't vote for the Democrats because they didn't like the idea of the higher taxes that first President Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris said that they would put in place. They wanted this tax cut. They wanted another tax cut. Well, that now is but they've also got along with it what certainly appears to be the real instability in the economy, the tariffs, the the hits to the dollar, Trump's attack on the Fed, and so on. So there is room here for the kind of coalition that threw out Herbert Hoover and replaced him with FDR. And I see the language of someone like FDR. I'm not making this explicit comparison. I'm looking at the language of through somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the representative from New York, or Mamdani, the Democratic nominee for New York mayor. So that language is starting to be out there, and there is room to build that coalition. But as I say, we've got the issue of this this new ICE police force, which is terrible. And we should be speaking out against it, because this is quite literally one of the things that the colonists of the King George III spoke up about and created their own nation to get away from. And here we have it. There are people pushing back against that as well. The courts, most of all, of course, but people speaking up really matters. So what do you do in this moment? First of all, it is worth continuing to call out the facts, the facts. And, one of the things I saw today was somebody said, I'm thrilled with this bill because I've been really heartbroken about the debt that the US is carrying. And now finally, Trump is taking care of the debt. Well, he's taking care of the debt by exploding it. This is somebody who has been paying attention to right-wing media and paid no attention to the actual facts. And you know what? There's nothing we're going to be able to do about the mainstream media or right-wing media except use our voices to establish what the facts are and to say, no, actually, this is what the bill really does. And you know what? You're never going to get your MAGA uncle to believe you, but you might get somebody who doesn't pay much attention to the news to believe you. And my friends at Red Wine and Blue have an entire website now helping you talk to people about these issues to spread reality. It's also worth recognizing that the things in this bill and the things that it will do are enormously unpopular. And by that, I mean, Americans overwhelmingly care about addressing climate change. That's out the window. We overwhelmingly care about taking care of our seniors and the people on Medicaid. They're going to be hurt, but here's another one that people aren't really talking about yet, but I don't make predictions about the future, except in this case, I'll do this. The corruption that this bill sparks is going to be enormous. There's a huge amount of money in this bill that is designed to go to ICE. It's designed to go to that wall. It's designed to go to all these places. And I would make a bet right now that a lot of it is going to go into MAGA Republicans' pockets, the same way that we have discovered so much of the money for Iraq under George W. Bush went into people's pockets and so on. Americans hate corruption. That's going to be something really to continue to call out. But in addition to that, it's going to be important for those of us who are able to protect the people who are hurt by this bill. And I mean primarily people of color, Black Americans, but certainly brown Americans, who are the ones who will pay most dearly for this bill. And in that demographic, I'm looking at my peeps, older white women. We are the demographic in the United States that is least likely to be imprisoned and least likely to be hurt by ICE. That's not to say we can't be. So take care of yourself, take friends, learn how to do the kinds of protests that are going to be happening safely. But I got to tell you, young men of color all the time say to me, should I be out in the streets? And my answer is always, I should be in front of you in the streets, because this is kind of our time. And we can protect those people, and our demographic can protect those people more than a young Black man can, because he's in the line of fire. So try and protect the people who are going to be hurt by this bill. There's going to be a lot of them. And the other thing that I'm really going to emphasize again is to work at the local level. And I wanted to leave you with a sign of hope in working at the local level. If you remember, Back a million years ago, but it was only March, I think. Remember when billionaire Elon Musk went to Wisconsin and wore the cheesehead hat and all that because he insisted that the election for the Wisconsin Supreme Court was the fate of humanity hung on it. I think he said the fate of Western civilization. And the Republicans lost that seat by a lot of points. I want to say 12, but it's been several months, so I could be wrong about that. Well, just 2 days ago, because there is now a liberal majority on that court, and remember, liberal does not mean Democratic, although in this world it sort of does. Liberal means a group of people who believe that the government has a role to play in regulating business, providing a basic social safety net, promoting infrastructure, and protecting civil rights. You can disagree within those things, but you say there is a role there. MAGA says there isn't. Those of us who think there is can be Republicans, independents, Democrats, Greens, whatever, but we believe in that liberal idea that the government has a role to play in protecting the individual from big business, from poverty, from the things that will stop an individual from being able to make the best of her or his life. Just a couple of days ago, that liberal majority on that Wisconsin court, so that was a local race, it was a state race in Wisconsin, overturned a 176-year-old law that banned abortion in that state. They moved the ball back to where it was before MAGA took over. And that's a step in the right direction. Wisconsin, of course, the reason that Musk thought the fate of Western civilization hung on that is Wisconsin is a gerrymandered state, or has been a gerrymandered state, and this court will almost certainly uphold fair maps. So working at the local level, and I would say working at the local level to protect the right to vote, to get rid of gerrymandering, and to protect the right to petition your government, which a number of states are cutting back on as citizens are demanding abortion rights, for example, or demanding fair maps, is very important. But working at the local level, making connections at the local level, working at the state level, and recognizing that this is going to be a long haul is going to be really important. But it is worth remembering that that is how a bunch of colonists who didn't even speak the same freaking language. I mean, people forget that because we've so whitewashed our history that everybody sort of thinks that everybody in the 13 colonies running around were all speaking English. No, they weren't. I mean, even where I am, people up the street spoke German. And spoke German, by the way, into the 20th century. And, people were divided by language, they were divided by religion, they were divided by wealth, they were divided by education, they were divided by any number of things. And a lot of them looked at their neighbors and thought, we need law and order because we don't want to deal with that dude. And the more that the neighbors talked to each other and explained that if you have a government that is unchecked by the people, you all lose your rights. They brought those people together to do something that was astonishing, which was to declare that people had the right to consent to their government and to have a say in it. And that everybody under that government, and of course, they were only talking about men at first, usually men of property, but it was a concept that was expandable, that everybody in that government was created equal. Under that government was created equal. And the fact that they did that at that time in such a small group of people under that kind of pressure, and they took on the most powerful empire in the world at the time, I think, it looks bad right now. There's no doubt. But if you think about that, and you think about the Civil War and how the regular people took that back, and you think you took back the democracy then, and if you think about how Americans took back democracy against the robber barons and against those people in the 1920s who were organizing as Nazis, don't forget that, in the 1920s, and how they, with that power, broke the stranglehold of the essentially neo-Confederates on the American South, that they'd had since 1874, that by 1965 we had the Voting Rights Act. We're not in a good place right now, but this I can promise you. If we do not stop this drift toward authoritarianism or fascism, which are slightly different, I'm such a pedant on that. I think we're in authoritarianism or competitive authoritarianism, but other people say fascism. I promise you, neither one is good. If we don't step up, each day is going to get harder and harder. And it is going to go, whatever you think you can't imagine now is going to be here if we don't stop this. And the thing is, it sucks. I'm with you. It totally sucks. This is not how I wanted to spend my 60s, let me tell you. But we don't really have a choice. And you think about everybody's lives. You don't get a choice of what gets thrown at you. You just got to deal with what it is. And this is what it is for us right now. And the thing is that with our numbers, our education, our skills, our coalitions, we have an extraordinary advantage that the people who came before us didn't. So I know today has been miserable, but I'm not ready to give up yet. And the thing is, I guess that even if I were, we don't really have a choice. We really have to keep on going forward. Just like Harriet Tubman said, the only way out is through. So take whatever time you need to mourn today. We did know it was coming, but recognize that nothing really has changed in terms of resistance, except that we just today got a whole lot of people who didn't realize they were part of the resistance yesterday to join us. So on that note, do the best you can with 4th of July. There is a lot to celebrate, even though there's a lot we can't celebrate. And I will pick this up next week. Thank you for being here. And we are dropping, just so you know, we're dropping a video about 4th of July, probably in a couple of hours. And I hope you will share it far and wide, because I think it kind of addresses this moment. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next week.